You're listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News, a podcast exclusively for the dairy industry.
One of our sponsors of the Dairy Voice podcast is National DHIA. NDHIA ensures information accuracy and represents their members' interests. They are the direct voice for the dairy information industry. To find out more, go to dhia.org.
What's the largest part of your cow's diet? Your forage. But every farm is different, and so is every ration. Whatever your crop, whatever your conditions, there's a Forage Mate inoculant for that. The Forage Mate inoculant portfolio delivers a wide range of proven performers, each uniquely formulated to maintain superior standards and consistency to help your cows reach their full potential. Flex to your forage goals at foragemate.com or contact your Diamond V Forage Mate representative today.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are in your day, welcome to the Dairy Voice podcast by Dairy Business News. I'm your host, Connie Kuber, with Sealpro Silage Barrier Films by Agriscience. Thanks so much for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends. So we are recording in late February, and spring has sprung here in California, where I'm at. And as we record, the Midwest has recovered out of a cold snap and is on its way to warmer temperatures this week. In the West, however, we're praying for more rain and snow for this next year's growing season. And it seems like weather and financials go very well together. Now, before we get started, I always keep in mind that we have listeners who are not part of the dairy industry, and we appreciate you learning about the great lengths that the dairy industry goes to educate and share information that benefits not only the cattle that we manage, but the people who consume our products like you. So thank you for going the extra mile and listening. Today, my guest is John Ellsworth with Success Strategies Incorporated. He's one of your favorite, most listened to guests with information and financial news and advice that makes common sense. So welcome to the podcast, John. For those who may not have met you before or heard you before, please provide a little background on yourself and your business, Success Strategies.
Appreciate the introduction and hope I can live up to the expectations you set. But always a pleasure to be here on the Dairy Business Podcast. A little background on me. I actually grew up I've been in the dairy industry my entire life. I've served as a herdsman after I left the University of Georgia with a bachelor's degree. I worked for the Holstein Association for 8.5 years. And then I really wanted to get more involved in the business side, which is what I've done since then in the dairy industry. Financed a lot of dairies. After my MBA program at Duke University, I worked for 2 different banks, did a lot of agricultural finance, more specifically in the dairy industry more than anything because of where I was located in California at that time. Then after 8.5 years, I really started to implement my business plan for Success Strategies Incorporated, which I had developed while I was at Duke University as part of an entrepreneurship class. 10 years later, we actually started the business, and we've done it. We're now starting our 27th year.
Wow.
And,
congratulations.
Well, thank you. We can no longer claim to be a startup company. We're kind of out of that category. So the way to get around that, of course, is, and this is true for any business, introduce some new things, new concepts that maybe we hadn't thought of originally in our original business plan. And that's made it fun. And it's also kept it very interesting. So we're not bored with what we do. Of course, when you deal in finance, and basically that's the biggest thing we do, finance and strategy. How do we get from point A to point B? How do we finance those objectives? First of all, do they make sense? Do they cash flow? And if they don't cash flow, why would you want to do it anyway? So that's a gist of what we do with clients. And 26 years, we've done it for a long time. Not that I didn't think we would go this long, but it's been a good ride for us, and we've enjoyed it. I said if I ever get to the point where I'm not enjoying it, I'm going to get out of this and do something else, like maybe retire. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I don't have any plans for that right away.
Hey there, after you've finished enjoying this podcast, might I recommend you join me, Tim Hammerich, and our guests on Clarity at Work from Zoetis. We'll be talking genetics and their place on the dairy. You've got a seat at the table as we discuss innovations, what's next for the industry, and more.
I have to find the value in everything that I do, and I still find value in Clarified Plus, so we're going to continue to use it.
Just search for Clarity at Work wherever you listen to podcasts. Once you finish with this podcast, of course.
Let's start with a quick update on the current events and status of the dairy industry in the first quarter of 2025. I'd really like to know where we're at with milk price and feed cost predictions.
2025, really, we've had a little bit of backing off on pricing, milk pricing recently. But I think part of that is tied to there's some uncertainty in the economy overall with consumers. And that's really being driven by the inflation that was created over the last 4 or 5 years. We can get that under control between the Fed and the new administration. But I think there's recently a little concern what the consumer demand is going to be, which I think has backed off milk prices on the whey products, on the milk prices and cheese prices a little bit, but still they may not be quite as rosy as what we saw, say, the first week of January when I was doing budgets for 2025 for clients. But I think overall it still looks relatively positive. And if you look at the feed cost compared to the projected milk prices, that income over feed cost looks fairly positive. And we're just now getting out of the avian flu downturn that a lot of herds got hit with, and it's just been a wave that started, I don't know where it started, somewhere in the Midwest, Texas, I'm not sure, and it came across Arizona, I believe. It's come into California, and it just gradually worked from the south to the north. And most of my clients have been hit by it, as have almost every dairy everywhere where it's shown up. It's unfortunate, but I think we're working through that. So I believe the supply of milk is slightly up. It's pretty minimal. My clients are saying, well, if it's so minimal an increase, why aren't we seeing bigger milk prices? And maybe we will as we go through 25. If you look back at 2024, I didn't expect any profitability until the fourth quarter at the beginning of 24. And then the third quarter, first 6 months were pretty rough, as we expected they would be. But then third quarter, we really kicked in some nice profits, some nice income over feed costs. Although there's some current concern about crops in South America, there's enough carryover in corn and soybeans that I don't know that we're going to see a lot of price pain on the feed front. It certainly doesn't appear that way right now anyway. I always share with clients that not that I think the feed costs are going to go down more. They could, but I always suggest that people lock in tiers, if you will, layers of feed pricing on commodities and things like that, because you never know. There could be some war outbreak somewhere, as we saw in Ukraine with Russia several years back, and that's still kind of ongoing, and how that can impact the commodity markets. You just never know. So it's almost like an insurance policy. It's always best to have layers of commodities fixed on price to protect yourself, if you will, kind of an insurance policy. But I'm looking for 2025 to be a pretty good year. We're just starting on the January numbers for clients as we wait for their milk statements at February 20th for the end of January. I'm anticipating it's going to be a good year. Will it be as good as 24, which was, for my clients, and it was quite profitable? I'm not sure if it'll be quite that good. I hope it's better, as you do too, because we certainly get paid a little bit easier in all fairness when the cash flows are better. But I think it's good. I don't know where we're going on these high priced cattle, and we'll talk about that later a little bit, but I'm anticipating 2025 will be, as far as the first quarter, it looks pretty solid to me.
So this first quarter, the beginning of the year, it's a good time to set goals for the rest of the year. What have you seen in the way of goal setting by dairy farmers?
Get your Sealpro silage barrier film today. Protect the seed, fertilizer, labor, and expensive inputs that you've invested in. Choose best-in-class Sealpro now in 3 different versions: traditional 2-roll application, our new co-rolled application, and super simple and wildly successful 1-layer film, Sealpro 1. It's easy to buy, easy to use. Contractor covering? We'll work with them. Learn more at sealprosilage.com. That's SEALPRO silage.com. Family owned and operated for over 25 years. 559-779-5961. That's 559-779-5961.
Especially following 2024's profitability, I think people are encouraged to not necessarily to expand. I don't know that there's the availability of milk markets with most of the co-ops as far as like, can I add, if I milk 1,000 cows, can I add 300 more cows? I don't see the availability space in the market for that at the co-op level anyway. So there's some restrictions on that. But I do see people making changes that are perhaps automation is a good example. If we can automate feed push-ups, I have several clients that have robotic setups, either all or part of their operation. And I think given the labor laws, those are pretty restrictive in California, especially. I think you're going to see more and more efficiency improvements, if you will. I don't know what else to call them, but I think that clearly would be a good trend. And I think it's something we are seeing. Even if we still milk 1,000 cows or we milk 1,500 cows, how do we do it more efficiently? How do we minimize our costs? Because if you think about it, in 1976, and that's a long time ago, that's almost 50 years ago, we were getting $16 a hundredweight for milk. And here we are talking about we're in the low 20s. So
Right.
basically, maybe we're 35-40% higher on milk price. So I have to ask you the question, have our costs gone up 35 to 40% in the last 50 years? Of course they have. They've gone up tremendously compared to that. I think the margins are going to be tighter. And I think partly that's part of what's driving the trend toward bigger herds than we've seen historically. That trend continues because it's the only way you can afford the efficiencies you need to invest in unless you have no debt whatsoever. It's hard to make a more than just a basic living with smaller operations. And I'm not discounting their value or anything like that. And a lot of them are family operations, but it's getting tougher to cash flow and build profitability with small operations. So one of the trends I see is fewer herds, larger herds, greater efficiencies. How do we milk the cows in a rotary parlor, for example, or a robotic setup, things like that. And I think we'll continue to see improvements such as what you folks work on with feed quality, things like that. When you look at feed today, and you guys have your company have done a great job with this. I'm so happy to see people using double covering on silages and minimizing the waste. I remember 20 years ago, we were seeing 20%. We were pitching it off the top of the silage. And so
some still are, but
yeah, some still
it's
are,
gotten
but
better, much better.
It has. I don't think I have anyone that's not using a double barrier along with inoculants and things like that
Sure.
to improve the quality. And that's why they're making 92 pounds of milk per cow per day. It's the quality of the feed and the other management inputs, of course.
You touched on labor. What do you foresee as far as that?
Most of my clients are in California. The California legislature has done a great job of basically, they come across like we're taking advantage of the people that work for us. I don't know that that's a fair statement, accusation, if you will, but this minimum wage keeps going up. I think what's going to happen, and I'm not opposed to the people making a living. They have families they need to take care of and stuff like that too. But I think it's a little ironic that the same people that are pushing for higher minimum wages are the same people that created the ridiculous inflation we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. There are two ways to make a profit or to cash flow, even as a family. One is to make more money, what they're pushing for, and the other is to minimize your expenses. And that's hard to do when you've got, I know the government says we have 3.5% inflation, but if you had 3.5% inflation, things would double in cost every 20 years. Well, we've seen things double in cost in the last 5 years or less. As I like to use this expression, I was bored at night, but not last night. I can figure that out. Some things, the numbers are kind of out of alignment there, I think. But again, when you go back to the producer, I think early 2025 is the best time to be setting objectives for the rest of the year. What do you want to achieve? And I'm not saying let's don't compete with your brother-in-law down the road. Let's compete with yourself. Did you make 83 pounds per cow per day? Can we get that to 85, 87 pounds per cow per day? And if so, how do we do that? So every challenge has some pushback. So I think it's a natural inclination to then say, okay, that's harder to do. My employees are not cooperating. Okay, so what do we need to do to get them to be pushing in the same direction you want to go? How can we make their lives better? How can we help them make more money and that type of thing? In some sense, I hate to say it, but let's offset the negatives of the government policy on labor costs by becoming more efficient and actually making better working conditions for those employees that we have and that are staying. So I
Right.
think that's a good thing.
Sounds like communication is in order. I'll look through to see how things are going and how those employees are working and what's going on in their lives too.
Absolutely. Communication is so big, and I think that's true. And I see it in our business with clients. We have clients that communicate really well with us, and we have some that only come to you when they have a problem. And we like solving problems. That's really a lot of what we do. But
Sure.
the reality is it's much more enjoyable to have a proactive approach. We're going to see labor go up $1.50 per hour, minimum wage, or whatever that change is. Okay, how do we deal with that? Let's get ahead of the problem. And I shouldn't say it's a problem because people do need to make more money. But how do we get ahead of that challenge so that we can fulfill what those people need as employees and take care of their families? We're not trying to destroy anybody's life.
And retain them. And retain them,
Yeah.
keep them there.
And retain them. Yeah. So to minimize the turnover. And how can we do that? I had one of my banking bosses at Sandlot Bank used to say, we'd like to price your loans, really as low as you'd like them to be. But the reality is, if we don't make a profit, we're not going to be able to make you loans. And the same thing applies for a dairyman. If he doesn't make a profit, he's not going to be around. You think you have it bad as an employee now? How do you feel about unemployment? Because the dairyman has to cash flow, has to profit as well. And so it's a two-way street. It's a balancing act, if you will.
Well, talking about those, the questions that they're asking and the big picture things that you're looking at, you told me earlier, John, that you had a lot of producers talking about how long they should stay in the business, given the strength of the current markets, maybe their age, the high prices they could get for cows and heifers today. Let's talk about that a little bit. What do you see and what are you offering?
Here's what I'm suggesting to people. With the high price of cows, and people are saying, I'm 58 years old, I'm 63 years old, whatever that age is for that person. Given the high prices, the good margins, the profitability, is this a good time for me to get out? And there's only one person that can answer that, of course, and that's the individual producer. I don't know if we've hit the peak on cow prices, but I do know that if they get much higher, nobody will be able to cash flow buying them. But I do think it's also part of the trend toward fewer dairies in the U.S. and larger dairies, a continuation of the thing we've seen for the last 25, 30 years. If a person's nearing retirement age, or they're just fatigued, this has been a hard industry the last 10 years. We've had really good years, we've had challenging years, but I have not in the last 10 years had anybody come to me and say, gosh, this is so easy, John. We made so much money. We'll hire you because we just know what to spend all this money on. So we're going to hire you instead and help you and your family do better. And I'm joking about that, of course, but I don't recall anybody coming to me and saying, we just made so money. We want a reality check. Can you tell us, how we could spend more money? It's not been like that at all. It's been a challenging. And if you go back in the 2015 to 2018 period, there was hardly any profitability at all. Every year is a new challenge. You've seen some articles I put out. Are you playing all four quarters? It's a grind on people that you got to play all four quarters. You can't win it in the first quarter or the second or third. You got to play all four quarters, just like a football game or a basketball game. It's getting to be a challenge. But I think people that are nearing retirement, for example, don't have any sons or daughters coming back to the dairy after college or whatever, they got to give this some serious thought because I don't know if this is the best time ever. It could be. If I knew that, nobody could afford to hire me. I'd be like the guy on the top of the mountain, just they'd come
Right.
see me and bring their millions and pay me the huge fees. I'm just joking, of course. But I think another question is, what would you do if you weren't a dairyman a week from now? What would you do? And I think that's something that men and women that are in the dairy business really need to give some serious consideration to. There are a tremendous number of opportunities out there. I think companies like yours, companies like mine, banks are hurting for people that really understand agriculture.
Mm.
So would you understand the banking industry if you went right into it out of agriculture? Well, I can tell you from my personal experience, I did not. There's a learning curve there. It wasn't terribly long before I was making loans and suggestions, recommendations, debt structure ideas for people, for producers that were borrowers. I think that's a big question that people need to answer. Now, that doesn't mean just keep milking cows to the day you die. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that there may be something else that you've done really well. The market's at, who knows, maybe it's at the top. It appears to me that it's going to level off at some point. And at some point, prices will go down on cows. Is this a time for you to consider getting out? But as a follow-up to that, I think it's really smart for people to think about, if I get out, what would I do? And I'll give you an example. I have one client that's really thinking about getting out. He has a tremendous amount of base at his co-op that he could sell with the cows. It's a very valuable commodity right now. He's thinking, I could continue to farm. I love farming. He also has almond trees. He's quite diversified. He could keep his facility and lease it out, or he could sell his facility. He's got lots of land. And so they're all different options that we're looking at for him. So that, I think he's a good example of what I'm seeing with clients. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't have very many of my clients that are saying, gee, is this a time for me to get out? But I would say probably 10% of my clients are saying, gee, I'm in my late 50s. Do I get out? Could this be a smart move? And some of them even have children. They're just not coming back because they want to become doctors or something like that. I think it'll be an interesting period of time over the next 24 months, the transition. And I don't see any signs of prices coming down for a while because of the shortage of heifers and things like that. But it's a time that people need to give some serious thought. And you may find this humorous, but I've had several people over the last 10 years come to me and they said, if I sell out, I might only have $2 million left at the end. And I said, listen, there are people that work for 50 years and don't have $2 million of retirement money put away. So trust me, you will be okay. You'll be able to you'll get by, I think, okay. So
you kind of, in the really big picture of things, is we only live once. And if maybe there's something that you'd love to do that doesn't have anything to do with agriculture, maybe you want to be maybe your love is machinery. Maybe you want to be a diesel mechanic and specializing in, I don't know, sailboats or trawlers or something like that. Or maybe you love cooking and maybe you want to, take a chef's course and open a restaurant. Maybe that's still feeding people, but in a very different way. But I think it's really important that you look at that whole emotional, you don't have to die on the hill of being a dairy farmer because your dad was one and your mom was one and your grandpa and grandma were one. I think it's something that we really need to look outside the box and see where we're at.
That's a good point. And if you think like that, which I appreciate you pointing that out, I have taught part-time over the years. I haven't done it for the last 10 years at different universities. I really liked it. And I think the part of the reason I liked it so much was because it was people that were in the business world and it was fun. It was enjoyable. Worked for banks that I didn't work for at that time. And so I really gave them a bad time about that. You should come over to the winning side. Actually, I enjoyed it tremendously. The business grew and I just couldn't find the time to do it anymore. There's an example. I could do that today. I see these opportunities on LinkedIn and other places all the time. And I think that would be kind of cool. I don't know if I would enjoy it as much doing it on a remote Zoom location as opposed to I like to interact with the students face to face. And so that's a good example of something.
We've talked a little bit about first quarter of 2025 and what you saw in 2024 as a comparison. And we've talked about things are kind of uncertain at the time, but things seem to be going along okay. 2025 looks to be a good year. Probably nothing, fireworks and explosions, but it's a good solid year, all the same. Maybe the expansions will be not so much with cows, but with improved efficiency and that kind of thing, automation. We talked about communications and how important that is to communicate with your employees, how things are going with them. And then we had an interesting discussion about the afterlife of dairy farming, if I can put it that way, or whether
That's good terminology.
whether you choose to stay in the dairy business, which is super wonderful. We absolutely need the best dairymen out there, dairy women out there,
absolutely
producing milk, and that's certainly not the message that everybody should get out of the dairy business. But if you're older maybe, or if you're considering retirement or out of the dairy business and into something else, to take a really hard look at what your life would be like. And I think that's great advice, John, that you gave. You really need to think about that before you push the button. And so is there anything else that you'd like to add, John?
I just think it's going to be a good year. I think you and I have plans to do these quarterly this year, these podcasts. And so I'm looking forward to it. So we'll kind of track the progress. Probably what I should do is go back and listen to this one before we do one in the second quarter, see how close or how far off we were.
Right.
But I do always want to be a source of encouragement for dairymen, because I think there's some of the greatest people in the world. I've worked with them my whole career, really.
Absolutely.
And you have too. And I can hardly think of any occasions where we didn't get paid because it was a dishonest person. If we didn't get paid, it was more of a challenge on the cash flow front. And I get to see that firsthand. So it's not like I can go to them and say, hey, why are you late on paying your bill? Because I know how hard it is and understand that. Totally appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I think instead of dwelling on that problem, the thing that I like to do is let's focus on going forward. What do we need to improve to make this better? While I enjoy solving problems, I really like to shift people, and I enjoy doing this tremendously. Let's shift into a positive mode. And what can we do to make this better? We can complain about the things that aren't going perfectly well, but rather let's figure out how to fix them, make them better. This is a good time to really think about lowering debt levels. But I think the reality is it's getting more challenging to find financing than it used to be. And I think as a result of that, and again, I'm not discrediting the banks. I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying it's harder to get the financing you may need. So I think with that in mind, we need to find ways to be more efficient, pay down debt whenever we have strong cash flow times, as we have in 24 and thus far in 25. Worked with a client last week, and we became, especially with this avian flu money coming through in some California operations, that from USDA or FSA, whoever's making those payouts. I think it's an opportunity to say, hey, do we need this particular loan? Do we need this equipment loan? And so we've taken a close look at that. And you talk about boosting your cash flow. That's big if you wipe out those payments. That's something people ought to give some serious thought about too as we move forward.
Is there a website or information source that our farmers and consumers can go to learn more about Success Strategies Incorporated?
Sure. They can go to www.success, strategies, strategies.com. And there's a ton of things. We have 8 or 10 pages that they can go to, and the various pages have different things. There are videos we put out twice a month. There are blogs that we do twice a month. We have some interviews that we've done in the past together. And there's also a financial analysis software that you can do a cash flow analysis and be able to use it to do what if scenarios, all different things like that. And one of the things we thought about doing is maybe some education to help people figure out how to do those. And so that's something we're giving some consideration to right now. The biggest challenge we've had is the amount of reach that we can make in the industry. There are a lot of people we can't get to. I mean, I just don't have enough time to do all those. But if we can set like this software called the Success Strategies Advantage, that's right on our homepage, they can actually do their own cash flow. And then we're absolutely available to do a Zoom call like this or some type of phone meeting, whatever works best for them, depending on their reception and setup. Talk about those problems that they're having. Why is my labor so high, for example? Well, I don't know. Let's talk about it. What do you got guys doing? What's the number of cows through the parlor every hour? Would you have to add any people to add 50 cows? That's a way to get your cost per hundredweight down too. It's diluted with more hundredweights. So it's an exciting time. The nice thing is there are a lot of good options out there. And I think banks typically appreciate people that are proactively thinking about ways to improve their business because, they're not the big bad wolf. The last thing they ever want to do is foreclose on somebody. What they really want is for you to be successful, have the financing you need, be successful, and repay your loans on an ongoing basis. So we do not charge just to talk to people. So I'm happy to visit with somebody if there's some help them going forward.
And if you're on LinkedIn, connect with John. He's got a lot of good blogs and is always posting really interesting stuff. I'm Connie Kuber with Sealpro Silage Barrier Film by Connor Agriscience. And you've been listening to the Dairy Voice podcast by Dairy Business News. Please subscribe, like, and share this podcast so you don't miss any episodes. We appreciate the financial responsibility and perseverance of all dairy farmers, and I hope you've enjoyed today's discussion. As we head into spring and quarter number 2, we wish you very well. Look for our next podcast with John coming soon. And for heaven's sake, stay safe out there. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again very soon.